Well, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, good everything, wherever you are in this beautiful world. Happy Friday from us here at Aquarius Rising Africa. And I'm super happy to be joined by Kerri Saint from Australia today again. How are you, lovely Kerri? How are things down under?
Oh, well, yeah, good. Very interesting at this point in time. I mean, Chantelle and I, look, to be honest, we had a very brief discussion before we joined together here. And so I filled her in on a couple of things. So she's asking a very open question for a reason. Um, so I'm not going to divulge everything I've said because
We will censor a few things.
I've told Chantelle if she needs to mute me at any stage, it's fine because I might go on a vent rage, but it's not normally pretty.
We were kind of like trying to compete with each other about who was the worst ranter. Like who'd give the worst rant between the two of us. Like, yeah, I'll put my hand up to that.
Yeah, I'm generally pretty meek and mild person, but I do have my moments, and yes, if I could be so bad if you were clothed, you would be stripped naked by my voice. It would just peel off.
Oh dear me. Well, I think I like you meek and mild, Kerri. Just for today. Just for today.
Yeah,
But
very
I'm
good.
looking forward to hearing what you've been going through there in Oz. I know, um, gosh, all over the world, there's so much craziness going on right now. But interested to hear from you there what's happening in Oz.
Yeah. Well, we're looking at the adoption front. Western Australia has started an inquiry into former forced adoptions. So, for those that don't know, we did have a federal inquiry into former forced adoptions in 2012. And we've had state and federal apologies, but each state hasn't had their own inquiry. And there's been quite a build up for redress because it's been 10 years since the apologies. Each state apologised and the federal government apologised, but there's been no move towards redress, even though redress was a recommendation. So Victoria had a inquiry, I think it was last year. Yes, it was. And then they recommended compensation, but mostly to the mothers, not adoptees. And so now Western Australia is actually having an inquiry, and I didn't actually get involved in this one. There are a number of submissions in there, and based on the fact that very few people really comprehend the trauma and enormity of forced adoption, I thought it pertinent to point people to the Western Australia inquiry so you can actually go and read submissions. There's New South Wales had an inquiry. It was 9 years before the federal one in 2011-12, and there was something like 400 victims gave evidence or wrote submissions, and that was technically buried. Like, they made sure that nothing evolved and that the submissions got buried in it. And the only thing that I was able to scrape out of it was an actual book, which I don't have on me, but there's a book written by victims, and it was quite an eye-opener, and it really opened my eyes up to what had happened to the mothers, because though I had my experience as an adopted person, I was never privy to my mum's experience, because I didn't meet her till I was in my 20s, and it wasn't until prior to the Senate inquiry, that I actually, many years later, that I found out the truth of my adoption. So as a child, I was told that my mum was 16, didn't want me, and died giving birth to me, when in fact she was 34 and a widow with 4 other children in her care. So a lot of lies had been told, and I've had to unravel them all. And a whole part of my story has been that I had been sent to a home where there was very little screening process, and I was unfortunately severely abused by both adoptive parents and was forced to work in charcoal pits. So I've had quite a journey trying to piece together my life and healing in the process, and understand the bigger picture and the depth of adoption, and not just the impact on mums or other people, but the true impact upon myself. And I'm still growing and still learning that process and still trying to undo the damage that's been done. So I speak up as often as I can, because I've basically been lobbying and supporting adoptees since 1982. That's when I started my group association for adoptees. So I've had a very varied and lived experience in forced adoption. And I'm on the government stakeholder committee on adoption and permanent care. I was invited to be on that about 8 or 9 years ago. And that's when it dawned on me that the government, who has all this power and control around adoption, have never had conversations with adult adoptees with a lived experience. So we're talking to the social workers and the managers and the people working in the department that deal with adoptions and see children adopted out, but they haven't had these full-on discussions with us as adults. And so they're learning for the first time. And so we have what's called the Review of the Adoption Act. So, and there are certain things in there that we will challenge them on and request that get changed. And it's a very slow process. Unfortunately, it was about 2 years ago, the Adoption Act review was supposed to come up, but COVID hit and they kept delaying it. This is going on the 3rd year and it's not happened. So, so I keep fighting for adoptees because we were never recognised for the abuses that we suffered. We're never fully recognised for the trauma that we suffered at the separation at birth. And we're certainly not on any radar for redress. And there are a number of issues around that and why that's occurring. But the biggest issue is that we have a number of high-profile adoptive parents, and we have a number of high-profile political people who are adoptive parents as well. So they don't want to change anything that doesn't suit their narrative of adoption, and this is what's happening. So in the Western Australia inquiry happening at the moment, 2 days ago we found out that there's a politician who's sitting on the committee, and he is in a same-sex relationship, and he has just received his child from overseas who he obtained by surrogacy, and he's on the committee overseeing an inquiry on former forced adoptions. So now all the victims are really upset because they believe that if they give evidence, they may not feel safe to do so. And they certainly feel that it will not be an unbiased inquiry. So why he's
Absolutely.
there?
Wow. That's crazy. That's
Mm,
actually crazy.
yes.
That can even be happening. Why is he on that committee to begin with? I
Well,
mean,
that's
surely
yes,
that would now be for someone who's more unbiased.
correct. Yes. There was a write-up in the paper. I actually didn't realise he was actually a politician. I actually saw it and read it about this man's journey with his partner, and all the positives about it, taking on doing surrogacy, and how much the mother is much more protected, and that the mother of his child did so for financial reasons because they're in a third world country and they're struggling, but there's a large sum of money that gets changed hands, and of course he's able to create a family artificially in this sense. Now, in my interview last week, so that's last month ago, 3 weeks ago, on the movie, that very controversial movie, I've forgotten its name, in that dreadful, with Jim Caviezel and Tim Ballard.
Sound of Deception.
That's it, right. So we've got, Jim Caviezel saying God's children aren't for sale. except for adoption, maybe. Like that's how I see it, except for adoption. And I think that any money that exchanges hands is trafficking. And I
Certainly.
I have shared numerous stories and given evidence of children being used um, for and moved into adoption and taken from their parents and sold, and what it costs, and baby brokers and orphanages that aren't legit, and you know it's just countless. Like, and the children that are placed in families that are totally unfit to take them, children are murdered and sexually abused. Now, I'm unfortunately I'm going to upset people because I've had it thrown at me a number of times that I'm maybe anti-adoption or have a screwed understanding or review of adoption because of my experience, my personal experience. If I didn't have 40 years experience of working with other victims, I would say you're right. However, when I went public with my story about abuse, and I had numerous adoptees reach me and contact me and tell their stories, and I've listened to countless inquiries. I've connected with groups all around the world and adoptees who have told similar stories or worse stories than mine. So my view is not skewed. I think I have a view that is very balanced about adoption. I think I tell the truth about adoption, and I'm very uncomfortable truths about adoption. And I think my attempts to do that are not to abolish adoption, but to help all those who either contemplate or are adoptive parents and adoptees themselves and their families to understand the trauma, and that the whole way in which we see adoption needs to change in an absolute flip completely, because the way we're doing it doesn't recognize the true impact and trauma of adoptees. So what I wanted to cover tonight is that two things, and that was covert trauma in adoption, and I want to help people to understand what that is, and then trauma bonding. Now, I want to point you all out to a very special submission in the Western Australia inquiry, and I want you to look up a submission by Christine Cole. And I started reading her submission. I know Chris personally. She's a mother who had her child stolen. I'm going to say stolen by forced adoption. We often think of adoption as a mother who relinquishes or willingly gives up, but in the era of forced adoption, these babies were stolen, right? And it's a word that the media and politics didn't want to use. They wanted to soften it, and they didn't want to tell the public the real truth, so they softened the words and the language around it, which made many very, very upset, those that were affected by it. So when I started reading, I didn't note how long this submission was. Normally a submission could be anything from a page to 20 pages. I know I supplied evidence that had far more than 20 pages. I started reading, got to page 90, and realized I was reading the 90th page of 722 pages. Now, Christine Cole's research is brilliant. She has really done a brilliant job in highlighting every aspect of adoption and the trauma and the truth and the crimes that were done here in Australia. So if you are interested and you don't read any other submission, read that one. And I would say, even if you're not an adoptee, even if you're not an adoptive parent, if you're thinking about having children, read it. If you have children, read it. So that's how strongly I feel about it. So what I've done tonight.
Do we have a link or something? Or
if people just Google Western Australia government, right? They go into the Australian Western government page, their official government page. You will go click into inquiries, and you can go and find there are always different inquiries happening. And they can go into the former forced adoption inquiry, and they can click on and read all the submissions. So they can get a balanced view by reading all the submissions there. I've actually done a bit of a printout of some of them, and I know I will not touch on anywhere near what I believe needs to be said about this subject tonight, but I would like to read some of Chris Cole's submission. Then we might need to break it up a bit, but we can stop and discuss it, and we can certainly, perhaps, and I think it would do it justice, to maybe even set up the next interview around this as well, because I think it's really important to understand forced adoption in the scheme of the world today, and why we have so much trauma and abuse within our society. And what Chris has actually done in this submission is actually provide that for people, to help people to understand the drug addiction and the abuse and everything. So so if people want to go in there and have a look at it, or they want to just rely on a little bit, so share 722 pages is a book on its own. So I want to just specifically look at the birthing process and what she actually says. So, people believe that the bond between a mother and a baby often begins at birth. But have a think about this. When a baby dies, if you have a stillborn and you have a baby that dies, right, why does the mother grieve so much? Because
it's an unnatural grief. It's such a deep, and when I say unnatural, I want to retract that. It's probably the most natural grief, that a mom experiences when she's, and even miscarriages, and I'm just talking, obviously, as the stages get further on, but it's a heck of a thing to have a miscarriage,
Correct. So,
yeah.
The bonding must have occurred before birth.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
So this is what she's written. She said, bonding begins in utero, that a pregnant woman has developing an intense relationship with her unborn child has been known by women since time immemorial. A woman who gives birth to a stillborn will grieve profusely because she has already developed a connection with her infant. Her baby is a real person to her, and she not only grieves the loss of the baby that was part of her, but all her hopes and dreams for her child. So she then goes on to state the research, and then she says, has been a convenient myth to believe that the bond between a mother and baby begins at birth. It has provided a shameful justification for the insensitivity of others to the grief of women who lost a child to death or who had it forcibly taken for adoption. So
it honestly boggles my mind that people say that. Yes. Surely there are umpteen studies that can be done. That's an easy study to do, relatively. Correct. All you have to do is interview mothers who've lost their stillborn babies, right? Correct. Or who have given birth to stillborn babies. That in itself should be study enough, right? It's insane that people will still, academics will still argue that point. I had a miscarriage. I know what it feels like to have a miscarriage. It took me a long time to recover. Not just, for me, it was emotionally as well, because, and I want to say this because I didn't feel this was relevant until I actually had a miscarriage. Mm-hmm. I would be working with women who'd be coming to me with miscarriages. And, I really just thought it was more hormonal than what they were recovering from. And obviously, definitely a sense of loss, right?
Yes.
But when I experienced that myself, it's a lot deeper than that. And I'm talking about a miscarriage. I mean, that's what I'm saying. A stillborn is so much worse, because just in the time that I was pregnant, my whole life changed. Your whole future changes. You make plans. There's just on an emotional level, another little being is entering your world. You're becoming a family, on an emotional level. That was, and then when that went, wow, it was a big one. And then also just dealing with the recovery from that, on a physical level as well. But now I can imagine when you've actually grown that baby inside you, and you've really, I mean, I've grown my own baby inside me too, but I'm really thinking more in terms of having to give it away, so I remember exactly the first time I felt him kick. I was 4.5 months pregnant, and it literally felt like I had butterflies in my stomach. Literally. It was the most awesome feeling. I will never forget that feeling, So you most certainly start developing a love for this baby. And had my child been stillborn or passed away shortly after birth, I don't know, or God forbid, stolen from me.
Yes.
Wow.
Can I then ask you then to do, we'll do a little bit of experiment, and we can honestly say that I put this to Chantelle before we do this interview, but she has no idea what I want to ask of her. So I want you to put your drink down. Would that be good if you just put your drink down? And
yes, ma'am. My drink, she's down.
Just relax. Put your feet on the floor and just relax. And I'd really love for people that are listening or watching who's had a child to perhaps consider doing the same thing. Right? Now, I want you to picture you being pregnant with your child. Is he? You've told me he's a boy. I know you sent me that message. And the feelings that I want you to remember, the feelings that you felt at the point that you found out you were pregnant. And I want you to go through the little steps, picture them in your mind as your stomach begins to grow, and the feelings that begin to envelope over you. You may have some fears about the future, but there's this love and this bond and this wonderment that is beginning to envelope within you, right? And you're beginning to feel movement, and with that is this absolute wonder that you've grown this little human being inside of you. And a love begins to build and emanate towards that child. And you may have a picture in your mind of what that child may look like. And so comes the day that you start to go into labor. And I want you to tell me, Chantelle, when you went into labor, did you have the baby in a hospital or at home?
Hospital.
Okay. So when you're in hospital, how were you treated by the staff?
Nicely. Firstly, I was in a hospital where they could not speak a lot of English, for some reason. So I was treated nicely, but quite strict, if you know what I'm saying. Quite cold.
Did you have
professional?
Did you have your mother with you or anybody with you as support, or did you have your baby on your own?
My ex-husband was there.
Okay. What was that? Was that relationship supportive? All right. Don't have to go. Right. I just want to picture it all.
He put it this way, he was there. But when it came to being supportive, I'm not going to go that far
Okay,
because I could,
that's
that would open up a whole nother can of worms. But
right.
he was
Okay,
there. Yes, he was there.
good. All right, but you're anticipating this child that's coming that you're going to care for,
Yeah.
right? And you're, getting adequate help and support to give birth to your baby. Now, I want you to picture the moment that baby's born, and then you look down at your baby, right? And just tell me some of the feelings that you feel. So the minute you see that baby.
I'll never forget it as long as I live.
Yeah.
He was huge. He was
Oh,
like 4.6 kilos.
yeah,
Okay. He
yeah,
was huge. He was so adorable. I remember afterwards in the incubator, the guys were, they couldn't believe he was a newborn because he didn't
yeah,
look like a little crunched up newborn.
yeah.
He was beautiful. And the first thing I remember, I thought it was a girl, right? The first
Yeah.
thing I remember seeing is Willie. I was like, oh, it's a boy. And he had, I've got a birthmark under my eye. You can
Yeah,
see it. Oh, this one
yeah.
here, sorry. And he had the same little strawberry birthmark on his right cheek.
Wow.
So when he was born. So I remember seeing his Willie, which he'll never forgive me for because I keep
Yeah.
telling him that. I said I was like, that was the biggest shock of my life. And
And my condolences go to your son that you were saying this on YouTube. And I'm very sorry to him. I don't know him. I'm very sorry that his mother's just embarrassed him. But so good on you, Chantelle.
now you wonder
So,
why my child's got issues.
so it's obviously the joy of having your child, and you're seeing a birthmark that's similar to your own.
Totally, yeah.
Did you notice anything else that kind of struck you when your baby was born?
He was beautiful. I remember that because he wasn't like scrunched up.
Yep.
I had a natural birth, but it was like he was big. It was like he was like a month or two old already. I
Yeah.
remember that about him, and he never cried for 3 days. I never heard him cry.
So
He was
all right.
yeah.
So as soon as you had him, what happened? What did talk to me? Was he
Yeah, it
put
was
on
put
your
into my
bed?
arms. It
Yes.
was put into my arms. I held him. It was such a surreal feeling actually,
Yep.
because suddenly this little being, because I remember like being obsessed with packing my bags. I couldn't wait to go to the hospital. You got to have your bag
Yep.
packed before you go have your baby. I was obsessed with packing that bag and making sure I had everything perfect there. But it was like, and I used to have a lot of conversations with him while he was in my belly. And
Wow.
coming out, I was like, hello, this is you.
Yeah.
And I remember that it's a beautiful feeling, but I have to say surreal almost. And
Yes.
then kind of getting to feel him, hold him, smell him, little
Yeah.
hands, just amazing. And I mean, he was amazing because he was very calm baby. First time I heard him cry, he was 3 days old when I'd been out into the garden and I was 5 minutes late for feeding time.
Wow.
And then I heard
Wow.
him yell, wow.
Yeah. Wow.
I said,
I can
that's my child. I came up the stairs. I said, that's my boy.
very good. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I want you to just sit with that for a moment. I want you to close your eyes again, and I want you to go back to the hospital, and you're starting to give birth. And I'm going to um, just ask you to see things in a different frame. All right. Now, just take a few deep breaths. Just relax. You've told me that this baby's coming. You're having some support. Your ex-husband's there, and you're so looking forward to this baby. And you've probably got some staff around you, though they're a bit strict. They're a bit stern. You know you're in the right place and you're being cared for. Right, just hold that thought. You're right there in that room right now. Just want you to hold it. And if anybody's listening to this, if you want to try this for yourself, just see you at the point that you actually gave birth to your child. Now, here's what happens. Immediately, a sheet or a pillow has just been placed on your stomach, and your hands and your feet are handcuffed to the bed or tied to the bed. Your legs are spread and stirruped. And all of a sudden, you don't know what the hell is going on. And the fear that is building up on you because you do not know what's happening. And you want to see your baby. You're asking questions. You look at the nurse that came in, that smiled at you, or at least gave you some acknowledgement that you are to be his mother. And when you ask a question, think of that question in your brain as if that's happening to you right now. What is the question that you want to ask? What's the first thing you want to say to this person who has now turned the most beautiful thing in your life into a terror? What is the first thing that you want to say to them?
Are you asking me?
Yes, yeah.
Sure, no words, just rage. That's
Yep.
what I'd feel. Rage.
Yep. Okay.
Helplessness and rage and violated and furious and hateful. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that you may be concerned and words might come out and say things like, what are you doing? Or at all? Do you think that you would just be frozen in fear?
No, I would probably yell, what the F? Yeah,
Okay.
I would definitely yell.
All right.
Yeah, I would not lay there frozen in fear. I would want to fight for my child.
Okay.
That is what that would be my instinct.
All right. So you can feel yourself giving birth to your child. Your child is now outside of you. You can't see what's happening. And then all of a sudden the child is bundled up and taken out of the room and it is screaming. What do you think you would feel then?
Yeah.
I want you to picture your son.
Yeah, I am.
Yeah,
I am. As you're talking, I'm going through it. It's a lot of helplessness, a lot of rage, but I also am aware that obviously if I'm tired or I can't move or something, just that feeling of where are they going? What are they doing? Hearing that screaming down the passage. No, that would be a psychological. Yeah, that's
Do you think you'd be screaming, "Where's my baby?"
Yeah, bring him back.
Yeah. Would you use the words "my baby"?
Yeah, absolutely.
Here's the reply. Close your eyes. Your same nurse looking at you. This is not your baby. This is somebody else's baby. This is not your baby. God is punishing you for having sex outside marriage. You're not a fit parent. How dare you? This baby's got nothing to do with you. This baby's going to better parents. You can't look after this baby. You can't look after yourself. You don't have the support. Where's your husband? You're divorced. You can't have this baby. This is not your baby. The more distressed you get, the more upset you get. They come in with mind-altering barbiturates and hit you in the left arm with it where you've been tied to the bed and you just fall into oblivion.
Yeah.
Each time you wake up and ask for your baby, they come back and repeat the same words and hit you again with barbiturates. On the third day, they'll bring paperwork to you and they'll ask you to sign it. You will ask, what are these papers for? They'll say, to have your baby adopted out. being the mother you are, Chantelle, you would refuse. And you would ask for your baby. And they would say, you cannot see your baby until you sign the papers. And then they'll hit you again with barbiturates. 2 more days will pass and they'll do the same thing. By now, your milk's coming out and they're hitting you with stilbestrol, which is a carcinogenic drug that dries up your milk. And they keep hitting you, and the social workers keep showing up and telling you what a pathetic person you are and how neurotic you are to think that you could have this child. It is not your child. It was never your child. You have no right to this child. When you argue with them that you can take care of this child, my mum will help me raise it, I have a job, they say, oh, no, this child will go into foster care. And we know what happened to babies in foster care. And this baby will get abused. How selfish are you? Sign the paperwork. Sign the paperwork. This goes on for days till finally you be between exhaustion and drugs. You either tricked into signing, because often they would come in and you would have adoption. They would give you a form thinking you're being released and you're getting your baby back when you've actually signed adoption papers.
Then how crazy. The control, the manipulation, I mean, the gaslighting. Correct. This has to be, this has to be one of the worst things that anyone can do to a woman, honestly. And, also just talking about this, we were having Jessie on with talks about the breeder programs.
Yes.
And it's like, I can imagine what it must be like for those women in those programs who've been part of those breeder programs as well. Because those babies, from what I'm hearing now as well, are specifically spliced. They're specific, some of them are specifically with specific DNA. So there's a lot of test subjects in there. And then they alter them in the womb and all sorts of things like that. I mean, it's crazy.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it is just horrific when you think about that. As someone who's going through that experience, the powerlessness.
Yes.
For me, what really going through that exercise with you, it was really the powerlessness.
Yes.
That I felt, that I would have felt in that situation, when you are tied down and you are at someone else's mercy. They're stealing your child, and then they insult you and diminish you as a human being.
And I'm going to insult you. I'm going to insult you again, Chantelle, because they didn't steal your baby. You gave it away. You relinquished it, and that's what the world tells you.
Yeah, that you've given your baby up.
Correct. It's called relinquishment.
And how do you ever? And again, just as someone who's had something like that happen to them, how does one ever explain that to someone else? You can't, because again, with so many of the humans that have been in cognitive dissonance over the years with so many things, I can now also understand why so many women have chosen to not talk about the fact that they've given a child up for adoption, because the trauma of that.
Just stop for a sec, Chantelle, because I don't want to be rude to interrupt you, but your language immediately went that these women gave their children up for adoption. Let's call forced adoption what it really is child theft, right?
That's
because we've all been trained to see them as birth mothers, the incubator, right? Not the mother. And we've all been trained to say that they gave them up or relinquished them. So my exercise here was to try and help people to understand that this was theft. This was kidnapping, which we condone in our society every day.
Which is why I said, that I'm sure that's why so many women don't talk about it, because the assumption is that they've given their kids up. But meanwhile, this is what they've been through. And you
Yes.
can't explain this to someone who has never been through that, because how do you explain to someone at work, or your next husband, or your whatever mother-in-law, whatever it is, that this is what happened?
Yes.
They won't believe you to begin with. So you
Correct.
rather just don't say anything, and you
Yes.
rather than try your best to go through life without that. But every birthday, every Christmas, every Mother's Day, or whatever it might be,
Yes.
you have that. And this is why we've heard about these stories for so long.
Yes.
And it's good to know, that this is going on, and this has gone on, because we can then, and that's why I say as well, not just the adoptees, because you're so right. There's a stigma attached to women that have generally given up their kids for adoption.
Yes.
There's a stigma attached. So as judgment, as other women, like myself, it's like I'm saying, going through that experience, not knowing what another woman has gone through who's had her child robbed from her.
Yes.
It's like, well, I don't know how you could ever give your child up for adoption. Who would ever want to explain that to someone who comes from that judgment, right? So,
yes. And it shuts them
it's very
down.
important.
That language shuts them down immediately, because
Exactly.
the true language isn't used, and the true language isn't used when it comes to the child taken. We're seen as being benevolently adopted out, like as if
Yeah.
we're a gift, as if we're to be lucky, as if, and
Yeah.
because the birthing process was never finished, and Chris Cole gets into fully onto the birthing process and how important, like what happens between the mother and the baby chemically and emotionally and physically and spiritually. And then she gets into what happens at the point of birth, and then the skin. And the reason your child did not cry for 3 days was because he was immediately placed back onto your skin. It's skin to skin contact. And all the good endorphins and all the chemicals were in the place. He'd been in his fright and flight, and then he'd been safely placed on your chest, and immediately the calmness came. This is my mum. I know my mum. My mother and I are one. The baby is not seen as a separate to the mother, right? So you said that baby cried only in 5 minutes, right? 5 minutes, and that baby cried, and you knew that was a cry that was, I need to attend to my child. You are wired, and the baby are wired as one, and you
totally.
know how to, like, you're in tune to that child's needs, and you respond immediately. Babies like myself were whipped away, held in a hospital room, not held or nursed. We're just fed and baby bottoms changed and put back in the nursery. How long do you think we cried for before we shut down completely? And so when the baby recognizes, in the womb, that mum and them are absolutely one, and then it's ripped away violently, like that, and then placed in a foreign smelling area, nothing is familiar to it at all, that baby experiences a death within itself. It feels like it's going to die, because without mum in the womb and everything, that baby's like, your heart beats, your blood pumps, you get your oxygen, you get everything with mum, and that is removed immediately. So every child taken by force in that manner and not allowed that skin to skin contact has now had what they call the primal wound, and a splitting within your psyche, your brain, your spirit. So every adopted person is walking around fractured, right? From that very point on, it's called pre-trauma.
Yeah, total.
Right. So, and then some of the babies were lucky enough to be placed reasonably early, days, weeks, some months or years, with a family. And they're having to adapt to, they're probably, whether they've lost all memory of their mother by then or not, but they've gone beyond survival mode. And I've heard countless stories from adopted parents about the child. They'll even say, well, never cried. What a lovely baby. It never cried. This was completely shut down. It cried and cried and cried for mum in the hospital. Mum didn't show up. And these are the babies, like myself, who go out into the world and don't know how to ask for help from anybody. When trauma hits me, I deal with it on my own. I don't go ask for help. I don't know how to.
Yeah.
My first learning of help and support comes from my mother, right? If my mother is missing, how do I learn that I have value and that if I have needs, they're going to be met? And
Exactly.
so I had no, like, and I went into an adoptive family who didn't want to meet any of my needs except probably a bit of food and a roof over my head. My needs weren't important at any level. So, you know, when I hear people say to me, oh, you know, like, you would have been abused if you weren't adopted out, like, surely, you know, your mother probably was incompetent or whatever, what they ever come up with to justify this story of adoption, this fantasy that they want to throw on us. And look, I know there's beautiful adoptive parents out there and they've done the very best they can, but every adoptive parent got a traumatized, fractured child who's had to adapt to survive what was the most unnatural thing to ever happen to them. And it's by miracle, by God, and the love that you've given them, that they've turned out to function well within society. So, so there's a narrow paradigm in this whole thing of forced adoption and adoption, is that it's called ghosting, and it affects the what we call the triad of adoption, and it's the biological mother, the biological father, the adoptive parents, and the adoptee. So the adoptive parents never get the help that they've gotten for their infertility. And so when they receive this replacement child that's not their DNA related, right, they will forever live with the ghost of the child they never had, the child that they envisaged in their mind, the child she may have given stillbirth to, right? So every time she deals with the adopted child, she's dealing with the ghost of the child she lost or never had, or the adoptive father is doing the same thing. So there's that where you don't quite measure up to the adoptive parents comes into play. Even from loving adoptive parents, this happens to, and it's not spoken about. And then you have the biological parents who live in the bewilderment and loss and grief and the ghosting of the child and wonderment, whatever happened to my child? Are they okay? Every subsequent child they have will always be overshadowed by the child they lost. Then you have the adopted person, the adoptive person who looks at these two people who have adopted them, and they are forever thinking in bewilderment about their own biological parents. So there are people in this relationship that are, and technically ghosts, that are having an effect in the relationship at the whole time. And what happens is it never gets spoken about because there's such fear and pain and grief from all parties. So until our governments and until our psychologists and our psychiatrists or whoever, our counsellors, fully grasp and comprehend the enormity of what adoption is, and forced adoption, I'm going to separate the two, because adoption today is done a little better. It could be much better. I agree, there are children who are abused and should be placed in homes where they are loved and treated with value and respect. But there are also discussions, that open, transparent discussions about your grief and your trauma and your feelings around being adopted. Because when you don't, you hold that person in trauma. And it took me, when I went public in 2009, I'm 60 years old now, try and work that out. But so when I first went public with my story about abuse, it took me that long to tell anybody that I'd been abused by these adoptive parents. And the worst thing that anybody could do to anybody who suffered abuse and trauma is to minimize it. And I've hit countless times where I've told my story and I've had comments or rebuttals that, oh, that's just your story, you know, you know, you probably would have been abused with your mum anyway or neglected, you know. And what you do to that adopted person, and like you say, most of us stay silent for the majority of our lives, and we finally speak our truth, and then we're hit with the disbelief. And you know, the listeners are trying hard because the world has painted them this picture of adoption. But the minute that you don't listen, the minute you rebuff, or I call it gaslighting, with these sorts of the speak that comes your way, you completely disempower that person from having a voice on any level and hold them in their victimhood. Because here's an adopted person who didn't have a choice or a voice by being ripped away from their mother, nor to the home that they went to, right? And if they happened to get abused in this home, they didn't get a voice about that either. And they finally speak up. The last thing we want is for someone to justify adoption to them. That's like justifying being raped because you went to a nightclub in a short skirt. And that's what I would really love people to understand, how to talk to an adoptee about their experience. And it's about listening. It's about getting rid of, you know, how the world has marketed adoption to you and to society, and listen to the reality of what it's like to live as an adoptee. I'm currently writing my book, and I started to talk about my experience in the way that adoptions affected me. And I said, I am not feeling the grief and trauma and loss of adoption. I am the grief, trauma, and loss of adoption. And by the very nature of my adoption, and by the very nature of the language used in adoption by society, I was already preset to be a victim and abused. And it gave license to my adoptive parents to abuse me. The whole narrative of adoption gave them their license to do it and get away with it.
You know what I think is so important to recognize here as well, because if we just look at the state of the world currently, we've got to reverse and go back and see where this began, right?
Correct.
And when we're looking at even at the turn of the century, where those kids, all the kids from the mud floods and, you know,
Yep.
the 40s baby, the newspaper, the newsies, that sort of stuff. I think what is very important for us to recognize is that these are the kind of situations that have created the trauma. Human
Yes.
in this world. Human
Yes.
beings are emotional beings. We are creatures of social delight. We
Yeah.
are meant to be with each other. We
Yeah.
are meant to be nurtured by our mom. We are meant to be loved and protected by our dads, right? That's how
Yeah.
we thrive. We
Yeah.
thrive when we are given these opportunities in life. And yes, there are some tragic circumstances that maybe a mom dies at childbirth or something, and there's a loving family that takes in a child as if it's their own. That is a very different vibration to what
Yeah.
you're talking about now in terms of having your children stolen from you. But I want to point out one of the reasons, as you're speaking, Kerri, what you were saying is that it's important for us to understand how to deal with people who've been adopted, or um, even adoptive parents who've had their
Yeah.
children stolen, and those children that have been. The world is full of
Mm.
this. This
Yes.
has been one of the main causes of emotional trauma, segregation, divide and conquer. What
Yeah.
easier way to create trauma than to separate a child and from its mother in that disgusting way? There
Correct.
is absolutely no doubt in my mind that these people know and knew exactly what they are doing when they
Yeah,
do
the
that.
nutmeg.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that, and again, looking at energy, remember everything in life is
Yeah.
energy. The trauma, the pain, the suffering, those frequencies that are emitted during
Yes.
those circumstances from both baby and mother is the leash for these
Yeah.
guys as well. We have to understand that. That's
Correct.
their leash as well. So
Yeah.
not just is it that leash, but it's a continuous thing over the years because now a mother withdraws her love. Um,
Yes.
and even if she goes and has 2 or 3 babies after that, there'll always be that hole in her heart for that
Yes.
first one or the adopted one, whatever, wondering the guilt. You can never give of yourself fully, I don't think, when you
Correct.
have a secret like that to keep. And especially if the rest of your family doesn't know about it, right? And the,
Yes.
and the child that goes on believing that the parent didn't want them. I mean, I've worked over the years a lot with both
Mm.
adoptees and adoptives,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Both.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I've seen the trauma that people go through. So we have to realize, guys, when we're looking at the breeder programs, we're looking at the adoptions, we're looking at the kids that suddenly arrived at the turn of the century with no parents. Where did they
Mm.
come from? 30
Yes.
years later, suddenly there's bustling cities all over the world now. We know where they come from. These
Mm.
are stolen children. And
Mm.
this is what our DNA predominantly is made up of:
Yeah.
loss, fear, pain,
Yeah.
suffering, and it's coming from this. And that's why it's so important to reconnect with people like yourself, Kerri, even if it's just to get education.
Yeah.
But if you know someone who has been adopted or whatever, and it doesn't have to be in a condescending way, have a conversation. Just say, gosh, new information has come to light about adoptive kids. I'm listening to it. Can I talk
Yes.
to you about it? How do you identify?
Yeah.
I'd love to
Yeah.
know more about it.
And it's
You know,
interesting. Research has shown that actually I've got a study here from in the States. It's from the hidden impact of adoption, the clinical science insights. And it says that 80% of respondents believe adoptive family to be more satisfactory than non-adoptive family. 80% in this survey. And they basically say that, again, like what I've been saying, is that adoption research demonstrates that much of society sees adoption as a fairy tale where all members of the adoption triad, the adoptee, adopted parents, and biological parents, have been done a favor through adoption. This favour is a blessing for the unwanted child who's now chosen for the infertile adopted parents who could not conceive, and for the biological parents who are relieved of the responsibility of raising a child. The redemptive story, however, seems to acknowledge only a portion of the wider adoption experience. And it basically goes into the trauma. It talks about the trauma of the dyad of all of them who have suffered the loss and in some way and respect. And the fact that the adopted child is the only human being that has to go, oh, I have to be really thankful and grateful for the trauma and the grief and the loss. I'm expected to hold joy for that experience. It's completely denied that I would hold any grief about losing a
exactly.
pathetic mother and father. That's unrealistic. So
Yeah,
how much of our physical and mental and spiritual being is being impacted every day of our life when we're denied the truth of our very existence and why we're here, and it's compounded by the fear of the adopted parents to want to have that discussion, and it's compounded by society that keeps telling us that we need to be grateful. I'm trying to tell you my story. Oh, no, 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 no. Shh. Just like the mum in the hospital, this is not your baby, right? The same thing is
exactly.
happening to the adoptee. No, no, no. These are your parents. You cannot talk about the ghost of a parent. You're not allowed to have that discussion. So when you're not allowed to go there, what happens? You can't deal with the trauma. You can't deal with the pain. And you stay in that for your entire life. Now, I lost someone recently. I wasn't really close to them. They were an adoptee and they were dying. And someone came into the room. He had adult children who, one of them had a girlfriend. She came to see him to say her last goodbyes. And he noticed that she was crying. And he said to his wife, "Why is she crying? I'm nobody." Right? This was a loving father who said he had a loving relationship with his adoptive parents. And he looks at his wife on the day that he dies and he tells her, "Why is this girl crying for me? Because I am nobody." If that doesn't hit you right in the here, I don't know what does, because that's what adoptees feel. They don't feel as if they're deserving of the love and affection and value of the people around them, because we've been told that we're not even allowed to discuss and even get close to just feeling what we felt by being ripped away from our mother. Whether our mother was an axe murderer or whatever, we're still ripped away from her. That was our life source. That was the one that gave us life. That was the one that mirrored who we are. And that just broke me when and I've known this man for a number of years, and such a loving man. He seemed to have a lot of love around him and give a lot of love. To know that that was almost some of the last words he said before he died, I wished I'd been able to have discussions with him. Adoption never came up between us and was never, ever open to it. He probably thought he'd be disrespecting his beautiful adoptive parents if he ever spoke about it.
And so I think that so many adoptees feel that way. You know, over the years, I must say, in the times that I've worked with people who've been adopted and going back to try and find their past and where they come from, you know, it's actually quite amazing. I remember one of my clients as well. He didn't want to know. But I knew he wanted to know. It was something he blocked off so secure. And I think I might have mentioned it before. This particular guy did not want to know. But I knew he wanted to know. And then in his own time, he went and did the inquiries and then discovered. And it was a great disappointment for him. He would much rather not have known. He was adopted into this wealthy trust fund baby life, and lived the life of a little king. You know, and honestly, and then like later, much later, you know, didn't want to know, discovered his background, and that was not a happy moment for him.
No,
really.
No.
And so there are those as well. You're always gonna, but I want to say as well, it's so important to do your homework on that. I just think as a person, and this is coming from me as a healer who's worked with these types of situations with people, even if they don't want to know, or that's fine. We're never going to force anyone to try and find anything out. But I have noticed how healing it is. I have noticed how healing it is, even if your parents have then passed on. You know, at least you know where you came from then. It's so important for people to have that sense of identity and just have someone who can tell them the truth, for God's sake.
Correct.
You know, if there's anyone out there who knows the truth about someone's adoption and you're keeping it from them, please, God, just be merciful and do it in a gentle way. If there's stuff the truth sets us all free. You know,
it does.
It might not be, I mean, I'm not always very popular. I don't care. But truth for me is something that's really important. It's also not what you say, how you say it, get it, okay? But I do think if you are one of those that knows some stories about someone's adoption, or you can be of help to someone, please do that, because These stories, it's like, I think when kids just disappear as well. You don't know where they are.
Mm.
You get no closure. And
Correct.
parents will die with broken hearts, or any loved one, a husband, anything, just disappearing. And that
Yeah.
happens a lot, right? So closure is such a good thing, one way
Yeah.
or the other. It doesn't really
Yeah.
matter. If you are able to give someone closure and truth, then please do that.
Yeah.
Really. Wow.
Most definitely. Chris Cole actually writes about that as well in her submission, and she talks about parents who have lost children that were kidnapped and murdered, and the studies that have been found that the people that found their child and then found the child had been murdered coped much better than biological parents who had lost their child, because it's the same feeling.
Absolutely.
The child has been stolen and kidnapped. They do not know where that child is, and they live in this um, unbelievable, they can't cope. There's no end. There's no end to their pain and grief and suffering. There's no closure. And
Absolutely.
she basically points at a very famous case here by Daniel Morecambe, who was 12 years old when he was kidnapped by a pedophile and killed here on the Sunshine Coast where I live. And she actually quotes his father many years later, when they'd found his remains, and how he felt when his remains had been found. And he said, finally they could have closure, and they moved to another process by having that. And then she gets into the research about the mothers who may never have that by the fact of forced adoption, because the child would refuse to meet them, or to want to know anything about them, or the child, they never meet, they never find out what happened, and it's vice versa with the adoptee as well.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
and it is
It's
the death.
it's such an important thing. And I want to just also just say thank you to you ladies that have been sharing in the chat here. Judy, I know that you off, but I really appreciated your sharing. Judy Thomas is just saying she hasn't thought about this for a long time and has cried for the first time in years after listening to today's show. That's a very good thing.
Yeah,
It really
good,
is a
Judy.
good thing.
Have a good cry, Judy.
Yeah.
Someone contacted me today. I don't want to say what it was about, but it was somebody who contacted you, Chantelle, and I did manage to speak to them today, and they said they were quite broken and shared what it was about. And I said that was perfectly normal in light of what they were experiencing, and that it's perfectly okay to stare at the wall for 4 days if you need to, or cry endless tears, and because that's perfectly normal to have suffered, to actually express that for the suffering that she suffered as a child. And I said, when you fall down, you rest, and when you rest, you get back up. So and I want to give that advice to people, that it's okay to fall down. There's no shame in falling down, because you're just resting, and when you've rested, you will get back up.
Absolutely.
So,
So true that. Think about a baby that's been running around, toddling around all 3 meters in the lounge. It's exhausting. Crash down live for half a minute. Okay, up we go again. Right?
yes. I want to, before we finish up, I'd like to leave you with a little story in the essence of it's true, and it's in her submission, Chris's submission, and it's a true story that happened here in Sydney. A premature infant in 2010 showed no signs of life when delivered at 27 weeks gestation at a Sydney hospital. Since the importance of a mother spending time with her stillborn is well researched to make the death a reality and assist in normal grieving, the infant was given to the mother. The mother unwrapped her son's blankets and placed him on her chest so she and her husband could say their goodbyes. Following 2 hours of cuddling and being spoken to by his parents, their son Jamie began to gasp. He opened his eyes. The mother cried out, "It's a miracle." Later, the infant's father stated that the mother instinctively did what she did. If she hadn't done that, then Jamie wouldn't be here. And that was skin to skin contact. The baby held out his hand and grabbed his mother's finger. He opened his eyes and moved his head from side to side. And 5 months later, their baby boy is healthy and doing well. Jamie's parents spoke of the importance of skin to skin bonding between mother and baby. The article elaborated how in Britain, mothers are now encouraged to have skin to skin contact, and has helped with feeding, bonding, and settling the child. So, you know, do yourself a favor, go read her submission.
I'd love to, yeah.
It, you know, and I'm quite happy to discuss this further, if you like. There's so many aspects of it that she's pulled out of it. And I think
that would be a great topic for next time when we chat about this. Is what's her name again? Sorry, Christine Cole.
Chris Cole, yeah. And I think it would be really important for people who have had their own babies, and for people contemplating having babies, and people contemplating, you know, am I not the right person to be a mother? I'm pregnant right now. Should I give this baby up? You know, I think the more knowledge you have, you can make a better informed decision, because we're told, like abortion, oh, it's nothing, then you'll get over it. You never get over giving a child up for adoption willingly. I'm sorry, it doesn't happen. You do not get over even choosing to have an abortion. It will hit you like a ton of bricks at some stage in your life, and you're going to have to face it. So if these discussions help you as an adopted person, I'm truly, truly thankful that I've survived my childhood to share this with you guys. And I want to be say I'm really grateful and thankful, Chantelle, for your YouTube and inviting me to speak on here and to share these aspects, because the rest of the world isn't doing it.
Yeah. You know, it's such a pleasure to have you, Kerri. And anyone who knows me, and by now a lot of you do, you know that I don't really subscribe to the norm. I will go in the direction that others are not going in, for the simple reason that these are important topics. It's the same thing with Alice Parola's discussions on mental wealth. I'm calling it mental wealth. You know, the bipolar personality disorders, the schizophrenia, the borderline personality. It's really all coming from this. Guys, it's all coming from this. And this is what I'm saying. And I'm not necessarily saying adoptions all the time, but it's coming from childhood trauma. It's coming from abuse, violation, SRA. We can go on. This is why the world is in such a crazy state. People have lost their compass. And that compass is the compass to the woman that gave birth to them. And that is the bottom line. Everyone wants their mother. I mean, think about that. I know, you know, that baby can be 7 or 8 or 10 years old, right? Or 7 days old. If it hurts itself, where does it want to go? Mommy. It does cool things with dad, and it can, but boy, when it's tired, hungry, or if it needs nurturing or comfort, mommy's the girl. And no one's ever going to change that. It's a natural thing. So we have to also acknowledge the power of being a mother, because most of us have actually, with society telling us that stay-at-home mothers are junk for so long now, that you are not worthy of yourself if you do not have a career. This is all part of this breaking this entire family system down.
It's a divine pattern.
Absolutely.
And can I read with you a little bit, see if we've got on to that? It was something I read out. I did women's ministries many, many years ago, and was on Mother's Day and was on a mother's role. Now, I can accept that some people may not have the same belief as myself, and that's okay. And I hope that those that hear this receive a blessing from it. But I just want to read a little bit of what I wrote. I said, women should fill the position which God originally designed for her as her husband's equal. The world needs mothers who are mothers not merely in name, but every sense of the word. We may safely say that the distinctive duties of women are more sacred, more holy than those of man. The king upon his throne has no higher work than has the mother. The mother is queen of her household. She has in her power the moulding of her children's characters, that they may be fitter for higher immortal life. An angel could not ask for a higher position. The mother is the queen of the home. The children are her subjects. She is to rule her household wisely in the dignity of her motherhood. Her influence in the home is to be paramount, her word law. If she is a Christian under God's control, she will command the respect of her children. There is God above, and the light and glory from his throne rests upon the faithful mother as she tries to educate her children to resist the influence of evil. No other work can equal hers in importance. She has not, like the artist to paint a form of beauty from upon a canvas, nor like the sculptor to chisel it from marble. She is not like the author to embody a noble thought in words of power, nor like the musician to express a beautiful sentiment and melody. It is hers, with the help of God, to develop a human soul to the likeness of the divine. That is your role as a mother. And that tells me that the value of the mother has been so degraded in our world and has been lost. And when we think about what we're calling mothers, birthing persons, and that we're now
chest feeders, womb carriers. I mean, doesn't that just make you want to punch someone's lights out? It's enough to bring out the very unspiritual side in me.
Yes, yes. So just a little bit more. The mother who appreciates this will regard her opportunities as priceless. Earnestly will she seek in her own character and by her methods of training to present before her children the highest ideal. Earnestly, patiently, courageously, she will endeavour to improve her own abilities that she may use aright the highest powers of the mind in the training of her children. Earnestly she will acquire at every step what hath God spoken. Diligently she will study his word. She will keep her eyes fixed upon Christ, that her own daily experience in what we call the lowly round care of daily duties may be a true reflection of the one true life. So, you know, when I read that as a mother, and I didn't, that wasn't out of my own head. That was from a Christian woman from many years ago, who just inspired me because I didn't have a good role model as a mother. You know what I mean? Like I needed to search to find what is a mother, what is my role. And I was so thankful that I came across her writings and that I could impart to my children. I wish that I'd had a wiser older woman around me to guide me and to teach me. I fumbled and I fell and I stumbled and I, and to be the person I am today has been through a lot of hard work, a lot of confrontation on my own stuff, seeking help, like, am I saying the right thing? Am I thinking the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? And when I read these writings, and it inspired me to not just be a better person, but a better mother. And it helped me to mother myself and helped me to understand how I should mother my children. If women hold themselves to such a value that they understand that they are the queens of how God sees them, queens of their household, the princess of a living king, how should we conduct ourselves? Why would we allow someone to treat us with disrespect and disregard? Why would we want our children, who are a reflection of ourselves, to be treated with such disrespect and disregard?
Absolutely.
So, the marriage is, the husband is what we call the house band. He is supposed to bless the wife, and the wife blesses the children, and they're to work as a team to do that. He plays his role, she plays his, and they're to lift each other up to the highest ideals so that they can bring their children up to have value about themselves. And unfortunately, the enemy has come in and he's just targeted families at every level,
Yeah.
And
They're clever, these guys. They're clever. They know exactly how energy works. They know exactly how to splinter. And it's so good to know their game, because as long as we know what their game is, we can up our ante as well. That's really what we need to do. So it's about unity, communication, honesty, forgiveness. If you know anything that can help anyone along the way, honestly, sit with yourself and with God and figure out how you can do that, because stuff like that is so important. Anyway, Kerri, it's been, excuse me, amazing having you again today. Thank you for joining us. We've kind of gone on a little bit later than what we usually would. And I want to just say thank you to our viewers. Firewater by Design. I'm so sorry, you know, it's horrific to hear you guys' stories in here, you know, being tortured and abused by parents. You know, I find it so hard to identify with that. I had the most loving parents. We were 6 kids. And make no mistake, we got our asses slapped every now and again. Hello. But, you know, I knew, boy, my parents loved me, and I knew I was protected. I knew I had the biggest and the most handsome father in the neighborhood. He was 6'6". Wow. And he was the tallest. He was bigger than anyone else's dad. And my mother was by far the most beautiful woman and in our neighborhood. And everyone knew that. I had the king and queen in my life.
Yes.
And honestly.
Go on.
No, I just wanted to say that is such an important value for a child. I've come from there, and make no mistake, my family was not perfect. I mean, we had our dysfunctions and what have you, but I'll tell you something, my parents always put us first. They always.
Can you say thank you to your parents for me, please, Chantelle?
Yes, and you know what? I will, because I want more parents to be like mine. Yes. Honestly, I really do.
I want to say this because without your parents being who they are, you would not be who you are. And if you were not who you are, then you wouldn't be offering to the world yourself the way you do. And
yes, I agree with that.
Yes.
And I can honestly say a lot of my groundedness, my sense of security in myself, my sense of confidence comes from the fact that I knew, and I'm going to say this in layman's terms, if you fucked with me, my parents had my back. And I knew that.
I need to borrow your parents, Chantelle.
Totally.
Yeah, and that's beautiful, and that's great to hear. Yeah.
And for me, it's just, you know, I've seen, even before I started this channel, just as a healer, it didn't take me very long to realize just how extraordinarily lucky I was to have the parents I did. Because I saw how many fathers were not there. I saw how many fathers absconded their responsibility. I saw how many fathers abused their daughters and their sons. And I saw the ramifications of that. And for me, you know, to have the situation that I'm in with my parents, I've been able to see, and also just look at my school friends. You know, last week we had our 40th school reunion, and we've come from similar backgrounds to what I do. And we have the same type values, you know. It's like, might be different for everyone, but people are secure. We're still taking care of our parents, you know. Some of us, our parents are still married and they're in their 90s, you know, and we're going and saying hi because we remember each other from school. It's my mom's birthday yesterday. And one of my first friends from my school sent her a pair of these fluffy, and they have birthdays on the same day, sheepskin slippers, you know, for winter. And she
Yep,
just said, give this to your mom and tell us that. And we know each other from we're 9 years old. I'm saying that there's such value in community.
Yes.
You know, I mean, I know my friend whose mom fell and really cracked her vertebra basically not too long ago. And I'm saying, babe, you come and live down here because she's alone taking after her mother. And it's like, you coming here, we are all taking care of your mother.
Yes.
You know, so that's the plans in action. As a community, we take care of each other. And this is what's so important. And I would like, if there's anything I can offer people out there, it's that.
Yes.
Be the stable parent. You don't have to be in a marriage or whatever. You might be divorced or battling. Just be that stability for your child. Your child will remember that. My child remembers all the crap things I did. I'm like, oh my God, did I do anything right as a mother? He goes, yes. All righty then.
Oh, goodness. Yeah. I know all
Anyway.
about that. I've had plenty of that myself. It's like, you know, when my child has a grievance against me, I go, get in line. So.
Yeah. Anyway. At least I have my granddaughter. She is life's bonus. I want to tell you. And when your babies start having babies, oh my goodness. There's nothing like that. I wish that for all of you out there. That's for sure. Anyway. Kerri, thank you so much.
No worries. And I'm pleased that I could have a chat to you tonight. And I'm sorry if I upset anybody and made them cry, and I'm hoping that they're healing tears. And if I leave one thing, if you're listening to this and you're want to be a role model to a young family that is struggling, or to a single mum, you've learned something from this. And, you know, if you want to step in and be that you know, that sort of surrogate mum or a peer support or mentor, please do that, because everybody needs it.
Absolutely. And yes, I wanted to say that as well. You know, even if you might, I mean, if you're in a position that you don't have someone to take care of, or, you know, just find your spiritual tribe is always around you. You don't always have to be blood relatives. I'm discovering that more and more as I get older. You know, I've got my circle of friendship that I've had for many years, and people have come and gone, but there will be those that stay, right? And those are the ones that you kind of keep igniting that flame with, or that are there solid for you. So it's beautiful. And I honestly wish that each and every one out there finds what they need when it comes to looking for that missing link, I'm going to say. And I wish you all well. I know, as I said, there's some always emotional viewers when we talk about these subjects, but they're so important. And I want to just say thank you to all of you for watching this, because it's so important that, as Kerri says, we can get this information out there. So God bless you all. Have a fantastic weekend. And we will see you back on Monday again with next week's busy schedule as well. We're having a nice busy few weeks after I've taken a week or so more downtime, but happy to be back. And cool. Take care, everybody. Have a beautiful weekend, and God bless you all. And yeah, Kerri, thank you so much. See you next time.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Bye-bye.